my beautiful friends. It's Amanda here, and today I'm going to try to use math to make the perfect palette. Does that sound a little bit crazy? Yeah, but it probably is. I went through all of my top palettes from my Best of 2024 palettes video, did some observation, I did some calculation, and I spent way longer than I care to admit making a spreadsheet, and it's my hope that I can use that data to build myself the perfect palette. I looked at the average number of shades across all of those palettes. I looked at the ratio of eyeshadow finishes within those palettes, and I also looked at the ratio of colorful to neutral shades. I realized there's some wiggle room in there. Two people can look at the same shade and one person sees it as a mauve and counts it as a neutral. The other person will say, no, that's purple. That's clearly a colorful shade. So there's definitely some wiggle room, but I think that the spirit of the challenge is preserved despite the potential for wiggle room on some of these more subjective categories. Let's put it that way. I want to just show you a breakdown of the process, me building the palette, how I chose the shades that I did, and I'm also going to show you an eyeshadow tutorial using the palette that I came up with. I think this was pretty fun. Definitely took me a lot longer to make this video than I care to admit, but at least it was fun. I'm going to flip the script a little bit here and do the tutorial first while I explain the process a little bit more, and then I'll end with the palette build. That way, when you see the shades that I chose, then you'll already know why. How did we get here? Then during the assembly of the palette, I'll be able to focus on giving you more individual eyeshadow info. That makes sense in my brain, so hopefully that translates to the actual video. The first thing that I needed to work out was the size that my perfect palette should be. I found the average number of shades by adding up all of the individual pans across my top 20 palettes. That gave me 272 total shades. Then, to find the average in each palette, I divided that result by the total number of palettes. So 272 shadows divided by 20 palettes. That gives us 13.6 eyeshadows in the average palette. And since I cannot add a fraction of an eyeshadow pan, I'm just going to round that up to 14. So now we know that our perfect eyeshadow palette needs to have 14 shades. Next, we need to determine how many mattes and how many shimmers appear on average across those top 20 palettes. We're starting to get a little bit more into subjective territory now because, as all of us makeup lovers know, there are more than just mattes and shimmers in an eyeshadow palette. We have those sequin shades that are mattes with little glitters in them. We have satin finish shades, although I have noticed that satin finish shadows are not as popular as they used to be. And, we have some of the more special outlier shades like pressed glitters and cream or cream to powder shadows. Then you could sort of break it down into duochromes, multichromes, toppers. There's just lots of little variations that we could dissect. And for the sake of actually completing this project, I did really simplify the process for myself and just count everything as either a matte or a shimmer. But certainly a case could be made for other methods. To be completely candid, we are already stretching the limits of my mathematical prowess here. So I'm just going to try to keep it simple because there will be less room for error and more of a possibility of actually completing this project. So I used the same process to find the average number of mattes and shimmers. I just totaled up all of the shadows from each one of those different eyeshadow finish categories across the top 20 palettes, and I ended up with 154 total matte shades and 118 total shimmer shades. Then I divided those totals by 20, so we end up with 7.7 for the mattes, and 5.9 for the shimmers per palette on average. Of course, we have to round up again, so 8 mattes and 6 shimmers. This works out perfectly. We've already determined that our palette needs 14 shadows total. So of those 14, 8 will be mattes and 6 will be shimmers. That is pretty close to my ideal. I do prefer more of a 50-50 split, but we're not too far off. This last bit is where I really had to restrain myself from going overboard because I could see myself getting very carried away with the color breakdown. Again, I decided to keep it simple here in order to actually be able to complete this project. I think it would be incredibly interesting to get into the nitty gritty of sorting the colors into even more specific categories and letting even more of my choices be statistically driven. Maybe that's an idea that I can revisit if anyone is actually even interested in this more simplified process. So for each palette, I split the shadows into either neutral or colorful shades. And I realize this isn't exactly a scientific method, but I'm more concerned with the spirit of the challenge and not necessarily being overly technical or overly focused on precision. I just did my best. And you know what? I think that's all any of us can do at this point. You know what I'm saying? So let's just let's just for now accept the imperfection of this experiment, and maybe we can use that to drive a more perfect experiment in the future. Remember, we already worked out that there are 272 shadows across all 20 palettes. Of those 272 individual eyeshadows, I'm just sort of estimating, okay? But we can call 88 of those eyeshadows neutral shades, and the remaining 184 are colorful shades. Certainly, if other people go back to those exact same palettes, their numbers are going to vary a little bit here and there, but the big takeaway is we're looking for about 32% of the shadows in our palette to be neutral shades, and about 68% of the shadows should be colorful shades. And just FYI, so that you can know a little bit more about my process, before I started tallying up the neutrals versus the colors, I wrote a little list for myself. So anything that I considered to be white, silver, cream, champagne, beige, tan, gold, gray, brown, black, gunmetal, bronze, or copper would be considered a neutral, and anything else would be a color. Some of the most difficult calls for me were shadows that were mauve, but they could be lavender, or like Enchanted Autumn has some grays that could be lavender. There are rosy shades that might be pink, but they might be a warm gray or a mauve, gold that borders on yellow, copper that's close to orange, or slate that is maybe a bluish gray, or is it a grayish blue? Definitely lots of room for interpretation. So we kind of just gotta roll with it. With those percentages worked out, we now know that the perfect palette needs to have 14 eyeshadows, 8 mattes, and 6 shimmers, 4 of which should be neutral, and 10 of which should be colorful. I also noticed that the majority of those colorful shades were from the blue, purple, and greens families, but I didn't actually tally them up. I felt like going into the actual color breakdown was leading me down an obsessive path. And quite frankly, I didn't think an actual video would be at the end of that path if I kept spiraling into more and more and more data collection. So I'm just going to let that cursory observation guide my choices a bit. And we're going to let creativity and the desire to make an actually useful palette take it from here. For example, I know that for a palette to be functional for me, I need a range of light, deep, and mid-tone shades. Ultimately, I need all of these different elements, the shade, finish, tone, depth, color,
all to work together and have some variety and continuity if I want to be able to create eyeshadow looks that I actually like wearing. And that's going to look different for everyone. A perfect example of that is the pop of color phenomenon. Some people love that one rogue, like hot pink or a neon or just one blue eyeshadow. There was the pop of blue forever and ever. And that pop of color goes against the grain of the rest of the palette. Some people really love that. They feel inspired by it. I personally don't respond to that kind of color story. So a singular pop of color effect isn't where I'm going to land when I start thinking about a functional palette color story for me. But someone else may be really inspired by that and they may use these exact same parameters, same number of shades, same split of mattes, same percentage of colors versus neutrals. And what is a functional color story for them within the same boundaries is going to be completely different. I mean, look, even I think I could make a few completely different palettes that I would like to use using the same set of rules. And I actually kind of love that the possibilities are endless. That's part of what I think is so interesting about this type of challenge. Even with very specific parameters, there's a lot of different possibilities. What I came up with for this video definitely serves as a functional palette that I'm personally really drawn towards. I like that the neutrals are anchoring the four corners of the palettes. I've got a little bit of light and dark gray and brown to really round out the little blue, purple, and green color stories that I created within the larger colors of the palette. I can see doing some little monochromatic looks. These also blend really nicely together. All of the blues look good with the purples and the greens, and vice versa. I think that there's enough variety in here that you're going to be able to come up with a lot of different interesting looks, some complex, some really easy throw on to shadows type of looks, something that is bright and whimsical, something that is sultry, smoky, all manner of looks that I personally like to do and wear frequently in a color story that I definitely would not have created if not for the boundaries of this challenge. So this was really fun. I think it was very successful. I would absolutely like to do something like this again just because it was such a challenge for me and it was fun.
This video took me way longer to make than I care to admit, but at least it was fun. I do feel like I did a little bit of self-discovery. It encouraged me to play with my single shadows, which I always love. Having to work within such a defined framework really tested my creativity a little bit. But I do really like it. I can see myself getting a lot of use out of this. And I do think that if a brand released this color story tomorrow, I would be into it. Certainly, there are plenty of other palettes that have this little bit of neutrals, blue, green, and purple vibe. I know that I have several in my collection. This reminds me a little bit of Aurora Struck, the ColourPop Mega palette, but this is just a little bit more refined. Definitely has a little bit more oomph to some of the shades than Aurora Struck, but it makes sense because I liked that palette a lot. I would love to hear what you think about this video. Could you try something like this yourself? I always love to hear what you think about things too. What types of shades, finishes, colors would be in your perfect palette? What size would it be? I always love to hear what you think about things too. So make sure you leave all your thoughts down in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye! One man's trash is another man's tripping hazard. You know what I mean? Huh? Great. You're doing great. Not gonna do what you think I'm gonna do. It's giving me a sultry goth fairy vibe, and I love that. I almost just knocked my whole tripod off the table. I literally almost just broke my entire filming setup on accident because I am a klutz, and that would have been terrible to the tune of several $100s and lots of missed videos. Anyway, now that my heart palpitations are over, okay. I got this idea way back in January. As soon as I finished my best palettes video, I started percolating this idea. I started collecting all the data then, and then I did not touch this idea all throughout February. I just had other stuff that I was reviewing and other stuff I was doing. But I'm glad that I brought it back out into the daylight because I think this is really fun, and I think that I could use this same rubric for other things. So maybe I'm going to see what else I can do with this idea because I love raw data. I love like the facts about things, not just how I feel about it. I like it. It's pretty. It's this, it's that. I like the facts. You'll probably notice that in a lot of my review videos, I do things like price per gram or comparisons or reading ingredient lists and claims and things because that stuff is going to be factual regardless of my opinion. I like that. Something about that certainty is relieving for me. Tell me you're an oldest daughter with anxiety without telling me you're an oldest daughter with anxiety. All right, thanks for watching. I love your face so much. I think that you are cool, cute, smart, and special, and I will see you real soon in my next video. Okay, love your face. Bye!